High in the Bavarian Alps stands a castle that seems untouched by time, a fortress of soaring towers and impossible beauty, plucked from the pages of a fairy tale. But beneath its breathtaking exterior lies a story of obsession, betrayal, and mystery. This is Neuschwanstein Castle, the vision of a king whose life ended in tragedy. King Ludwig II of Bavaria built this castle as an escape from reality, a place where he could live out his dreams. But before it was completed, Ludwig was deposed, declared insane, and found dead under suspicious circumstances. Some say he drowned by accident. Others believe he was murdered. More than a century later, the truth remains elusive. Who was Ludwig II? What drove him to build a castle fit for a fairy tale king? And why did his life end in tragedy? This is the story of Neuschwanstein Castle and the mystery that still haunts it today. To understand the mystery of Neuschwanstein, we must first understand its creator, Ludwig Otto Friedrich Wilhelm, King Ludwig II of Bavaria, a man of beauty and contradiction, of grandeur and isolation, a ruler who belonged not to the world of men, but to the world of dreams. Ludwig was born on August 25, 1845, in Nymphenburg Palace, a grand estate near Munich. He was the first son of King Maximilian II and Queen Marie of Bavaria, a boy born into power, raised to rule, destined for the throne. But even from childhood there were signs that Ludwig was different. His father was a man of strategy, discipline and logic, a ruler who valued war over art, politics over poetry. He saw in his son the future of Bavaria, a king who would follow in his footsteps, a leader shaped in the fires of duty. But Ludwig had no interest in duty. From an early age, Ludwig showed little interest in governance. He was an intelligent child, but he lived in another world, one of myth, legend and fantasy. While other young princes trained in military tactics, Ludwig spent his time reading tales of medieval knights, of noble kings, of lost worlds where honor and beauty ruled above all else. And when he wasn't reading, he was dreaming. He would spend hours wandering through the mountains, staring at the ruins of old castles, imagining the people who had lived there, the kings who had once ruled. While others saw crumbling stone, Ludwig saw splendor. He saw a lost age, waiting to be reborn. But his father had no patience for Ludwig's fantasies. He was concerned that his son was too weak, too delicate, too consumed by his own imagination. And so he tried to shape Ludwig into a ruler of strength. The boy was given a strict education in military strategy, politics, and state affairs. He was expected to study diplomacy, to learn the art of war, to prepare for the throne that would one day be his. But Ludwig struggled. His tutors described him as inattentive, easily distracted. He would drift away during lessons, retreat into his thoughts, losing himself in visions of castles, operas, and chivalry. His mind was not in Bavaria, it was in the past. If his father tried to mold him into a king, his mother, Queen Marie, nurtured his artistic and romantic nature. Unlike Maximilian, she adored the countryside, often taking Ludwig on long walks through the mountains. She encouraged his appreciation for nature, for beauty, for art. And in her, Ludwig found a quiet refuge from the expectations of the court. But despite his mother's warmth, Ludwig was lonely, isolated. He had no close friends, no brothers, no companions who truly understood him. And in that loneliness, he turned deeper into his dreams. His mind became filled with visions of medieval grandeur, of kingdoms ruled not by politics and war, but by honor, beauty, and nobility. He longed for a world that no longer existed, perhaps one that had never existed at all. And then at the age of 15, Ludwig encountered the man who would change his life forever, Richard Wagner. When he heard Wagner's music for the first time, it was as if something inside him had awakened. Here at last was a composer who understood the world Ludwig dreamed of. Wagner's operas were not just performances, they were living myths, grand sagas of gods, heroes, and doomed love. And to Ludwig they were not just entertainment, they were prophecy. But while Ludwig was captivated by the world of music and myth, Bavaria's ministers had other concerns. The kingdom was preparing for war. The political landscape of Europe was shifting. Bavaria needed a leader, strong, decisive, pragmatic. And then tragedy struck. In March of 1864, King Maximilian II fell ill and died suddenly. Bavaria was left without a ruler, and in an instant, the weight of the kingdom fell upon the shoulders of Ludwig II. At just 18 years old, the young dreamer had become King of Bavaria. The court expected him to be a leader, a warrior, a politician. But Ludwig had other plans. His first act as king was not one of military strategy, but of art. Ludwig's first decree was to summon Richard Wagner to Munich. The new king did not want to rule Bavaria. He wanted to bring his dreams to life, and with Wagner at his side, he would do just that. The moment he heard Richard Wagner's music, Ludwig II was never the same. It was not just sound, it was a portal to another world, a world of gods, heroes, and tragic love, a world where beauty reigned above all else. To Ludwig, Wagner was not merely a composer, he was a prophet. Within weeks of becoming king, Ludwig summoned Wagner to his court, writing to him with a desperate urgency, "You are the master of my soul, your art is my salvation." In Wagner, Ludwig saw a kindred spirit, a man who, like him, sought to escape the mundane world and create something truly divine. Wagner, for his part, was more than happy to accept Ludwig's patronage. The king lavished him with riches, built him an estate, and financed his most ambitious operatic works. But Wagner was not an easy man to admire. He was arrogant, controversial, and deeply in debt. He had enemies, many enemies, and now those enemies extended to the Bavarian court. The government saw Wagner as a dangerous influence, a man who was draining the kingdom's treasury with his extravagant productions, while Ludwig neglected his duties as ruler. But Ludwig did not care. He poured millions into Wagner's operas, believing them to be the highest form of artistic expression. And then he went even further. Ludwig did not just want to experience Wagner's stories. He wanted to live inside them. He envisioned a castle not for governance, not for diplomacy, but for something far greater, a realm of legend. And so in 1869, construction began on his masterpiece, Neuschwanstein. Deep in the Bavarian Alps, a castle began to take shape. Perched on a rugged cliffside, surrounded by dense forest, Neuschwanstein was a dream made real, a fortress of impossible beauty, untouched by the outside world. But unlike the castles of old, Neuschwanstein was not built for war. It had no defensive walls, no barracks, no cannons. It was not designed for armies or politics. It was designed for one man. Inside, the castle was a shrine to Wagnerian legend. The Hall of the Singers, a grand ballroom, depicted scenes from medieval epics. The throne room, modeled after Byzantine churches, was meant to symbolize Ludwig's divine right to rule. And yet, something was missing. The throne was never placed. Because before the castle could be completed, Ludwig's world began to unravel. By 1880, Neuschwanstein had become an obsession. Ludwig poured vast sums of money into its construction, funding it with loans he could never repay. The Bavarian treasury was running dry, the government grew uneasy, but Ludwig was blind to their concerns. He rarely left his castle sites, retreating further into his fantasies. The king was slipping away from reality, and his enemies were watching. By the mid-1880s, Ludwig had become more myth than monarch. He rarely attended official meetings, barely acknowledged his ministers, and lived in near total isolation. The government had tolerated his eccentricities for years, but now they feared for Bavaria's future. Something had to be done. And so the ministers made their move. In 1886, Ludwig was declared insane, but here is where the story takes a darker turn. None of the doctors who diagnosed him had ever examined him in person. The decision had been made behind closed doors. Ludwig was forcibly removed from Neuschwanstein. His castle, his kingdom, was no longer his. He was taken to Berg Castle, placed under constant surveillance, stripped of his title, a king without a throne, and then within 24 hours, Ludwig was dead. On June 13, 1886, King Ludwig II went for an evening walk with his psychiatrist, Dr. Bernhard von Gudden. Hours later, their bodies were found floating in the lake. The official cause of death? Drowning. But there was one problem. Ludwig's lungs contained no water. Had he taken his own life? Had he attempted to escape and been shot? Witnesses claimed to have heard gunfire near the lake that night. Others reported seeing bruises on Ludwig's body, but no autopsy was ever conducted. The case was closed before the truth could emerge, and just like that, the story of Ludwig II was over. But his castle, his dream, would remain. Decades after Ludwig's mysterious death, Neuschwanstein found itself entangled in another dark chapter of history, World War II. The castle, built as a sanctuary for art and beauty, became one of the Nazis' most valuable hiding places. When Adolf Hitler came to power in the 1930s, he launched one of the most ambitious and systematic art-looting operations in history. Across occupied Europe, priceless paintings, sculptures, and historical artifacts were seized from museums, private collections, and Jewish families. The Nazi Party saw art as more than just culture. It was power. It was propaganda. Hitler envisioned a grand cultural center, the Führer Museum in Linz, Austria, where he would display the greatest artworks in human history, reshaping the world's artistic legacy in the image of the Third Reich. But before these treasures could be put on display, they needed a place to be stored, hidden, protected from Allied bombings. And so the Nazis turned to the one place they knew would be safe, Neuschwanstein. At the heart of this operation was the Einsatzstab Reichsleiter Rosenberg, or ERR, one of the Nazis' most secretive divisions, tasked with seizing and redistributing Europe's cultural treasures. Led by Alfred Rosenberg, a key Nazi ideologue, the ERR systematically looted over 5 million works of art and rare books across the continent. In Neuschwanstein, the ERR set up an entire headquarters dedicated to cataloguing and processing stolen artwork. Its grand halls, once meant to be Ludwig's refuge, were transformed into an inventory room for plundered culture. The castle became a treasure trove. Over 21,000 stolen works were stored within its walls, including masterpieces from the Louvre, the Uffizi Gallery, and private collections of Jewish families who had been forced into exile. Many of these families would never see their possessions again. But not all of these works were meant to be preserved. The Nazis had an agenda. Art that did not align with Nazi ideology, so-called degenerate art, was marked for destruction. This included modernist pieces, avant-garde works, and any art created by Jewish or anti-fascist artists. Thousands of paintings, sculptures, and historical artifacts were lost forever. Neuschwanstein, built as a monument to beauty, had become a warehouse for destruction. But just as Hitler's Reich seemed unstoppable, the war began to turn against Germany, and suddenly, the Nazis faced a new problem. The Allies were coming. As Nazi Germany crumbled, its leaders scrambled to erase the evidence of their crimes. Artworks were loaded onto trains, hidden in underground vaults, or in some cases destroyed to prevent them from falling into Allied hands. And Neuschwanstein, one of the Nazis' greatest hidden caches, was at risk. The monument's men were historians, curators, and architects, men and women who risked their lives not for land or power, but for culture itself. Their mission? To find and recover as much stolen artwork as possible before it could be lost forever. When they arrived at Neuschwanstein in 1945, they found a treasure trove of stolen masterpieces. Paintings, sculptures, manuscripts, all hidden away, waiting for a future that would never come. If the monument's men had arrived even a few weeks later, many of these works could have disappeared forever. But even today, many of these treasures remain missing, hidden, perhaps destroyed, perhaps waiting to be discovered in some forgotten vault. The true cost of the Nazi looting campaign will never be fully known. Today, Neuschwanstein is one of the most visited castles in the world. More than 1.5 million people come each year, drawn by its dreamlike beauty, its fairy tale charm. But few know the truth of its past. It is a castle of contradictions, built by a man who longed for solitude, yet now filled with crowds. Designed as an escape from politics, yet later used as a tool of war. A place meant to preserve beauty, that once housed the spoils of destruction. For some, Neuschwanstein is a story of tragedy, the vision of a king who lost his throne, who lost himself in dreams, and whose life ended in mystery. For others, it is a testament to the power of beauty, to the endurance of art, to the idea that even in the darkest times dreams can survive. Perhaps that is why Neuschwanstein endures. It is a castle frozen between past and present, between reality and fantasy. A monument to a man who lived in legend, and a place that even today feels like it belongs to another world.